Bring to us your poetry from inspiration sought. Come join us with your images, your voices, words, and thought. From here we'll share your balladry with those who do not know it. This platform's here for you to show the world that you're the poet. Welcome to You're the Poet, the poetry podcast featuring you. I'm host Matt Bergio, and I'm here with my co-host and dad, Phil Bergio, as we start this podcasting adventure. The idea behind You're the Poet is to create a community of people that love poetry and want to share their poetry with others. To find out more about how to join us, send us an email to host@you'rethepoet.com or visit our website at you'rethepoet.com. So, again, welcome and thank you for joining us on our pilot episode. We plan to keep these episodes fairly short, and because you're not here to join us yet for this episode, this one will be on the shorter side. Our basic format for these episodes will be to read a poem that inspired us, a classic poem we like, or just one of our favorite poems that we have permission to use, of course. Then Phil and I will each read a poem that we've written and talk about it. And finally, in future episodes, you'll get to share one of your poems. So let's get this started. Today I'm going to be reading Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Both my dad and I were excited that this poem is, and along with some other Robert Frost poems, are finally in the public domain. And it might seem kind of cliche, or I don't know what you want to call it.
That's right.
Commonplace to be using a Robert Frost one. It's such a popular poem, and I think everybody likes this poem and talks about this poem. And I don't want to feel overdone, but this is a poem that really inspired me in my early poetry writing and my love for poetry. And so I wanted to share it. And the poem I'm going to be sharing on my own, as well, is based off this poem. So that'll be the poem that we're going to be sharing. Phil, did you want to say anything? First of all, Phil, welcome. And is there anything you want to say?
About this poem, I really had an opportunity. If you go to YouTube, you can see it. You can see Robert Frost reciting his own poetry. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, I think I've seen that video too, or I've definitely heard sound recordings of it. I really think that is neat, especially considering how old it is of a poem. So we're going to go ahead and start with that. So this is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's a sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Robert Frost.
I think it was really cool that Matt did that from memory instead of reading it.
Well, I will say it's one of the first poems I ever memorized, and ever since I memorized it in the seventh grade, it has stuck with me.
You must really like it.
I do. I remember in seventh grade we had to do a poetry assignment where we had to pick a poem and memorize it and read it in front of the class. And I believe it was out of the Right Source 2000 book, which I believe I still have. So I chose that poem and read it, and it's stuck with me ever since. So that was the poem I wanted to share as our first shared poem from the classics, as we say, or just poems that we like. So moving on from there, I'm going to read one of my poems. As I mentioned earlier, this one was inspired by stopping by woods on a snowy evening. And I wanted to start with it today because, doing this podcast with my dad, it's kind of special and neat for me because he's one of the people that inspired me in poetry, along with Robert Frost. I remember growing up, he was a poet or someone who wrote poems. I remember even on our old word processor that we had, kind of like predating computers, writing some poetry on there. The first one being about my cat, one of my cats that I lost as a child. And so he's always inspired me, even, from winning a couple poetry contests with the local newspaper, which kind of allowed us to go to the movies for a year. I always thought that was neat. I've always loved his poetry, and he's been a great inspiration. So this poem that I'm going to read is called The Two Men Who Inspired Most, written in the format just like Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Frost. The Two Men Who Inspired Most. The two men who inspired most are not the kind who tend to boast. Both humble in their word and deed are honored in this poet's toast. My father early sowed the seed and gave me my poetic lead. Those heartfelt poems and memories were all his son would ever need. A snowy evening near some trees, accompanied by an easy breeze, unveiled to me the work of Frost. His flowing style I yearned to seize. These two men gave without a cost. Their thanks aside will not be tossed, but written here to not be lost. But written here to not be lost. Matthew Bergio. So that's the poem I wanted to share as both people that inspired my love of poetry.
That was a birthday gift for me. Matt brought it over framed, got it hanging up in the living room.
So I guess it says here that was written. So that was for his birthday in 2003.
Whoa.
So going on to, over 20 over 20 years ago. Wow. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Phil, share one of your poems with us here on You're the Poet.
Okay, this is kind of like a share poem too with Matthew, because I wrote it. He was riding with me in the car when I got the inspiration, when he was a little Weezer, about 5 or 6 years old. It's called Perspectives. I watch as life leaves the trees, as summer greens turn orange and brown, while forest sprites leave the vines. Soon winter's cold will chill the bones. I think of summer past, of warm sun, cool green grass, and how autumn winds will come too soon, too fast. My son must sense my thoughts of autumn chills and dying leaves. I say, well, fall's come at last, and summer's green and warmth have gone. When he nods but smiles, I realize he sees the real beauty of the trees. To him, the wondrous colors mean life's promise of return in spring. Through my son's eyes, his father sees life, not death, from the trees. Phil Bergio.
All right, thank you for sharing. That's always been one of my favorite poems of yours. Now, was that one featured in anything? Was that from the newspapers or anything, or no?
No, the newspaper ones were Christmas ones. We'll get to that later.
Okay, yeah, we'll share this for a holiday episode, hopefully, in December. Anyway, well, thank you for listening in on You're the Poet. Again, our plan for this is to have you join us on the podcast and share your poetry and join our community. We really are hoping that this will take off and build up, and hopefully we'll have enough people interested that we'll have multiple guests per episode. But for now, we're going to sign off. Again, send us any feedback you might have or inquiries about how to get on the podcast to host@you'rethepoet.com or check out the website at you'rethepoet.com. And hopefully we'll be able to build this up and move this along. So until next time, Phil, thanks for joining us.
No problem. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thank you.